Hey, what's going on, guys? Back for another edition of We Talk LA. And today I am joined by a very special guest. He is the founder of Modern Hiker. He is a television writer, a native plants enthusiast, and perhaps most importantly for today's conversation, author of now two books on hiking and exploration in the city of Los Angeles, Mr. Casey Schreiner. Casey, what's going on, man?
Hey, Brian. Good to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you too, even under these pandemic circumstances.
Exactly.
Um, I really wanted to have you on today because, like I just mentioned, you have a second book coming out later this month that's specifically on Griffith Park, which I've had a chance to preview, and it's pretty cool. So totally excited about that. And also, just in terms of what's going on with stay at home and social distancing, there's a lot of I guess issues we can discuss about trails reopening coming up in the next hopefully month or so.
Hopefully, yes.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. I guess it all depends on where the state is at with opening those spaces up, but we might see some loosening of restrictions in the coming weeks. So kind of wanted to touch on that with you. So yeah, we'll kind of approach this conversation in two parts. So first, let's talk about the reopening of the trails, and then we'll kind of dive deeper into Griffith Park itself.
Sure.
So I guess what we've seen over the last week or so in terms of public spaces, all the locus has really been on beaches, like specifically down in
Yes.
Newport Beach, Huntington Beach, in Orange County. We've had some kind of back and forth between the governor and the city officials there. There's some pictures of some dispute about these super crowded beach spaces. Like this past weekend, I guess there were an estimated 40,000 people who were out there. Newport Beach says that everybody was distancing properly, and they have some helicopter photos, and there's other photos that are showing people really, really close together. So
Right. Yeah, no, I've seen the photos from both LA County, where it's like the LAPD mounted on horseback, keeping everybody totally off the beach, and then Orange County and Ventura County. One of my friends actually is a journalist in the Inland Empire, and she totally vouches for those photos that make it look like people are very, very close together on those beaches.
yeah, I mean, it's a hard thing to police. I think this kind of gives us a purview into the conversation we want to have, because beaches may be a preview ultimately of what happens with trails when they reopen up. If too many people are using them all at once, and then it becomes a big tit for tat with whatever county agencies are operating those trails, and if they want them open versus maybe the governor doesn't want them open because these kind of images or photos come out with people hugging each other too close together on the trail path. So maybe you can give us some insight into what you think the outlook is over the coming weeks or months for that.
Sure. And again, this is I am not a medical expert.
Right. No. Yeah. This is just your opinion as kind of like what I would call a hiking expert, and somebody who's a well-versed outdoorsman.
Yeah. So we're and again, the core problem with this whole quarantine and stay-at-home situation is that it's literally a virus that we don't really know anything about. It's brand new on the earth, so we don't really have any idea. Is it airborne? Can it be spread by aerosol? Does it require contact? And it seems like every day we're learning more and more about it. And it seems like in the past couple of weeks, what I've been seeing on the internet is that there's not a ton of evidence that being in that 6 feet of space in the outdoors is necessarily dangerous, or as dangerous as we might have originally thought. So hopefully, if that line of research continues to pan out, that we'll have a little bit more access to opening public spaces all over the state of California. But again, I think crowding is going to be an issue, and that's the thing that really needs to be thought of when you're planning your outdoor activities. Even if you remember what seems like years ago, back at the beginning of the stay-at-home orders, exercising and hiking was considered a safe and healthy activity to do, as long as you kept 6 feet away from each other, you weren't hiking in groups, you were trying to stay away from crowded areas. And what we're seeing with the beaches is it's the challenges that are going to happen when those parks do reopen, or when those trails do reopen. We have also seen certain other counties nearby in Ventura County and the Conejo Valley, their open space district, as well as the city and county of San Diego, have started to sort of open up some trails. And what they're doing is they're doing this sort of rollout of how you can do it. So for right now, they want kind of stay in the neighborhood. If you've got to drive to a trailhead, you shouldn't be going to that trailhead. Once you're on there, they recommend having like a plan B, C, D, and E. If that trailhead is crowded, go somewhere else or try a different hike. Keeping masks on when you're in close proximity with other hikers, and just being conscientious of the human surroundings. Most of the time when we're hiking, we're paying attention to the natural surroundings, which is kind of why we go out there in the first place. But with this quarantine and stay-at-home order and with the COVID-19 situation, we also need to be paying attention to the people around us and making sure that we're staying safely, safely distanced from them, and also using our face masks if we need to.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of the counties are going to follow sort of the metaphor the governor's been putting out there in terms of this dimmer switch, where they might open things up, relax things a little bit, and then see how it goes. And if people are abiding the orders or abiding the best practices and policies they're putting out there, then they can continue to let those trails remain open, maybe open other spaces within their respective counties up. But if people are not abiding it, then the clamps come back down, and then we're shut out of these spaces that we're so desperately wish we could get to right now, I think.
Exactly. And I also think I actually don't know how I didn't hear that San Diego had as much of an issue as Orange County and Ventura counties did with their beaches. And I don't know what the restrictions were in those counties, but I know in San Diego it was a similar sort of rollout, that dimmer switch situation where you're not supposed to have, like, no seating was allowed, no beach blankets were allowed, and that kind of helped control the congregation and the lingering. So maybe we'll have sort of a more controlled rollout of access to those places in the future.
Yeah, I think part of the problem is that there are some people who are just hell bent on getting out to those places if they know they're open. Some of them are coming from outside the county or the city too, like specifically in Huntington Beach. They had closed parking lots, I think, but people were just parking in the neighborhoods and then trekking over for, some minutes of walk to get to the spaces they wanted to get to. And that in itself is not good when you have a bunch of people on the sidewalk.
Absolutely.
In crowded spaces. It kind of defeats the whole purpose of these the sort of dimmering it, or whatever you want to call it. One other issue I wanted to touch on really quick was, and this was an issue for us reporting on kind of when the trails were getting closed in LA. There's a lot of different agencies that are under, doing land management in the county of Los Angeles.
Yes.
And each kind of has their own press department and is putting out orders that some may cover like city parks, some might cover like ones that are covered by there's like the county, is it county recreation parks, and then city, city?
Honestly, it's like, think of how many you think there are and double or triple it.
Right.
Like, that's how many land agencies there are. And honestly, most hikers, even experienced veteran hikers, don't really know which agencies are in charge of which plots. I now have written 2 books where I have had to tediously and painstakingly hand map individual boundaries for different land agencies, and I still don't know 100% of the agencies that are out there. We've got county parks, we've got city parks. There are 88 cities inside LA County. They each have their own park departments. There's regional parks, there's state parks. We have both the Park Service and the Forest Service, and the Forest Service's jurisdictions over 2 separate different agencies, the Monument and the National Forest. So there's really, if you consider that every single one of those agencies is on their own timetable with their own restrictions, with their own safety recommendations, it can be really, really hard to stay on top of that. I mean, I tried at the beginning of the stay-at-home orders when they were rolling out these closures, and it was just very overwhelming to try to stay on top of it, and really confusing from a user's perspective. It's tough, but I really, really hope that if and when we are allowed access back into these places, that all these different agencies can really get together and just do like one big blanket statement for everything, because your average user does not understand the difference between Santa Monica Mountains National Recreation Area, National Park Service land versus Mountains Recreation Conservation Authority versus LA County Parks. Like, they don't know the difference,
right? And
they don't know where those boundaries are.
Yeah, I think like the one that really got people was when the LA County's broad department says all parks in the county are closed. Okay, you assume everything's closed, but Griffith Park was not closed.
Griffith Park was not closed because it's an LA City park. It's different jurisdiction.
Yeah, that's a great segue into Griffith Park. Nicely done. So, I think that kind of gives everybody kind of a good broad overview of where we're at with possibly reopening in the coming weeks and what they need to be cognizant of. But yeah, let's talk about Griffith Park, because you've written this great guide. Why don't you first of all just tell people what the book's going to offer, and what people might be able to use it for once
Sure.
we are all out of stay at home and back to using our public spaces.
Yes, exactly. So I actually just got the first physical copy this week, so it's here. It's called Discovering Griffith Park. It's out with Mountaineers Books. And what I pitched it as when I pitched it to the publisher was I wanted to do a pocket visitor center for the park. Griffith Park is one of the biggest municipal parks in the entire continent of North America. It's also one of the busiest. It gets around, there are no exact numbers, but between 8 and 10 million visitors per year, which really puts it above any single national park unit except for the Great Smoky Mountains, and that's because they count people driving through it. So tons and tons of people go to this park, and I don't think even people who live in LA, who have grown up here, who have been here for decades, I don't think those people really understand how much you can do in this park and how much this park has to offer. It's obviously, I'm a hiker, I run a hiking website, there's hiking trails in this book, that's sort of the backbone of it. But I also wanted to include information about if you want to go horseback riding, where are the good equestrian paths? Where can you rent a horse? Where can you board a horse? If you want to go cycling, what are the good streets to cycle on inside the park and around the park? If you want to get around the park without a car, how can you do that? What's nearby? If you want to visit the museums, there's several different museums in there. Some of them open only a couple days of the week or maybe once a month. What are those museums? What are their hours? How do you get to them? And then even basic stuff like how do you reserve a picnic area? How do you get a tennis court? Where can you take swimming lessons? How can you visit the actual visitor center? There is an actual visitor center inside the park. Most people don't even know about it. So it's a little bit of everything for everyone. And what I'm trying to do is to shine a spotlight on what I think is a really special and unique place in the city of LA that I think deserves a little bit more attention, a little more accolade, and hopefully a little bit more love from Angelinos.
Yeah, no, I mean, from what I've been able to glean from it, it does that wonderfully. And I also like that there's a lot of little kind of like anecdotes kind of layered in to all that usability, where you're kind of touching on some of the unique history and some of the just interesting facets of it. Was there anything specifically that you found, any little historical nugget or any story that just like really surprised you, jumped out to you?
Honestly, there are so many stories in this park. It was I sort of try to tell people that I write hiking books as a way to write history books that people will buy. If you bought my first book, you know that there's tons and tons of history in there. There's even more in this book. There's just so many good things, from the story of Griffith J. Griffith himself, which is very scandalous and complicated, to the story of how we got the park, to the story of how we kept the park, all the different stuff that's happened inside the park. One of the things that has actually bugged me a lot since I've been living in LA, if you visit the south end near the Ferndale entrance, there is a statue of Leif Erikson that is there with no context. There's no plaque, there's no name, there's no anything on it. So one of the things that I dug up in the book was, why is there a statue of Leif Erikson in Griffith Park? And it turns out it was created by a very, very famous, very well-known Icelandic sculptor, the first and most famous female sculptor from Iceland. She actually, if you go to MacArthur Park, there's a statue of Prometheus, I believe, that's hers as well. She did a statue on the Astoria Waldorf Hotel in New York City. And she crafted this because she was a direct descendant of Leif Erikson, and LA at that time had a huge number of Scandinavian immigrants living in it. And LA was actually one of the driving forces behind the National Leif Erikson Day. So this was actually put up as part of that movement to sort of gain momentum for Leif Erikson Day. I don't, as to why it's in Griffith Park, I still don't 100% know that, but at least now we know the story behind it and what it's doing there.
Yeah, I mean, I was reading through the book and all the different aspects of the park. It reminds me of, like, if I'm trying to personify in some way, it has this very eccentric personality, all these little layers to it, which also mirrors in a lot of ways the person it's named after, because Griffith J. Griffith, he's kind of a crazy man. Like, if you want to get down to it, maybe you can talk us through some of his the scandals that were part of his life.
Of course,
how he came to to own the lands, and then eventually donate them to the city.
Yes. So the park is in many ways like kind of a microcosm of LA itself. Like it's messy, it's complicated, it's wonderful, it's weird, it's really inspiring. It can be really depressing at times, and like the park has all that, which is one of the reasons I love it so much. So Griffith J. Griffith is the guy that the park is named after. He and his wife donated the land in 1896 in mid-December, I think December 16th. I'm not 100% sure, but it was a Christmas present to the city. And Griffith J. Griffith, as you mentioned, is he's kind of a complicated character. I could generously describe him as a complicated character. On the one hand, he was kind of a self-made rags to riches story. He grew up an orphan, lived with some of his family members in a dirt floor house in South Wales, where he lived with like 20 other relatives, all in a one-room house. Moved over to the US, kind of learned the ropes with journalism in Philadelphia, and then moved out to the West Coast to do journalism in San Francisco. Eventually learned that he could make more money sort of doing booster articles about like the mining industry and the oil industry. Learned about that stuff immensely, and then used that knowledge and wealth to basically buy real estate. So when he moved to LA, he was a real estate tycoon, basically. He bought Rancho Los Feliz, which was a huge, huge tract of land, basically going from like Echo Park, Silver Lake, all the way through Griffith Park, Edendale, some of those other neighborhoods nearby as well. And in his time in Los Angeles, he became like kind of a man about town, a very well-to-do mover and shaker, who was respected for his business acumen, but also really detested because he was kind of a I'm from the East Coast, so we have this term called nouveau riche, which is basically just like new money. Yep. So he was definitely new money, like ostentatious, wore these elaborate fur coats. He had this gold-tipped cane. Actually, the statue of him in Griffith Park is him holding his gold-tipped cane. And he would, he had these bouts of extreme generosity, as well as these bouts of like really weird, regressive, retrograde ideas about people. So when he made money, he donated lots of things to the city. He initially sold the city the water rights of the LA River at well below market value, yes. Which was kind of one of the first reasons that he was considered like a hero to LA. At that time, Rancho Los Feliz had access and the water rights to the LA River, which at that point was the main water source for the city of LA. Yeah. And we were, the city was downstream. So if Griffith wanted to dam that river and steal all that water, the city would basably die.
Yeah.
It would have
changed the entire course of Los Angeles, just
the entire
that one
city.
Move. Yeah.
So he was seen as being kind of a hero to the city for that. Once he made money, he basically went back to Wales, got his family, and then paid for their schooling, paid for their education, paid for them all to move to the States. So he was very generous that way. But he also he hated Catholics. And that's just from growing up in South Wales. It's a heavily Protestant area. And he brought that with him into the US and really, really detested a lot of the Catholics who were living here. And most importantly although he was a public teetotaler, he was a secret drunk. He was, by many accounts, he was drinking multiple quarts of whiskey every day. So he donated this land to the city. At that point, the actual borders of Griffith Park were several miles from the actual borders of Los Angeles. So LA's park, which was the biggest park in the country, I believe at that time, bigger than New York Central Park, wasn't even technically inside the city of LA. So he donated the land for the park, but then a couple years later, while he was in Santa Monica, he had much too much to drink and accused his wife of spying on him and trying to poison him on behalf of the Pope in Rome. So he basically made her confess. She wouldn't confess, and he shot her in the face with a revolver. She survived because she glanced away. She jumped out the window of her hotel. She fell about 2 stories into the owner's suite in the hotel in Santa Monica. Obviously, they got a divorce after that. There was a huge scandalous murder trial. His defense was alcoholic insanity, which dodged him the murder verdict, but it did make him go to San Quentin prison for several years. And again, you know, while he was in San Quentin, they were offering him like clerical work for his hard labor, and he asked to be treated like any other prisoner. So he did the hard labor. By all accounts, he was a very well-mannered prisoner. And when he got out, he wrote a book about prison reform, and basically said that the prisons, the way that we had them set up, was basically just for free labor for the state, and they weren't actually focused on making people who were going in there better or reforming them so that they could join civilization again. So he was heavily involved in both city parks and prison reform for the rest of his life, but he was kind of shunned by LA society until his death after that.
Yeah, what a remarkable life that guy lived, though. I mean, however you want to term it. Well, one aspect of the book that you spend a lot of time on is like giving detail in multiple ways to look at or access the Hollywood sign. That's a since we were talking about public interest and the possibility of overcrowding, I think that's probably the singular landmark in within Griffith Park that gets the most attention and can also lead to the most overcrowding situation, or where neighborhoods are protesting the amount of people that are flooding through them to try to get to that specific landmark. You reference in the book the Dixon report, which was conducted, I think, in 2018.
I believe so.
And basically, that came out because they're trying to search for ways to mitigate all the overcrowding. So they're trying to like throw a bunch of stuff at the wall. What are possible solutions we can have to this? And there was everything from like, you know, increasing parking enforcement to creating a gondola, or even like a second sign.
Building a second sign was an option. Yes.
Like all kinds of interesting ideas. Do you have any like take on that, or any thoughts on that? Because I'm just curious about one, if there's anything within that report that you think would be really of value that we should be implementing, and two, like what of the sort of like I guess the attitudes of a lot of people who live really close to the park, who are tired of folks crowding through their neighborhoods or parking within them and going up, like specifically in Beechwood Canyon, I'm thinking of people accessing that trail, because that's like one of the, if not the shortest way, then definitely one of the shortest ways to get to the sign proper.
So up in Beechwood used to be like basically the fastest and quickest way to get like a fairly close up front facing view of the Hollywood sign. There was a lawsuit from I believe Sunset Ranch that basically closed that access gate for entering. You can still exit that gate, but you can't enter the park into it. So they basically made it so that it was no longer possible to basically drive up, get out of your car, walk for like 5 minutes, and get a really nice front-facing view of the sign. But the sign is, it's a world-famous landmark. It's now inside Griffith Park completely. If people don't know Griffith Park, what's interesting is that like you've seen it. Like you have 100% seen Griffith Park in film, TV, movies, music videos, even just headshots for actors that you've seen. And one of the reasons that you've seen it is because the Hollywood sign is there. And it is a world famous landmark that draws people to it. As the city has grown in size, and as we've gotten sort of access to more things like online mapping, GPS, and social media, hotspots like the Hollywood sign all over the world are sort of experiencing this phenomenon of being loved to death. You see it in places like in Canyonlands National Park, Joshua Tree National Park is sort of getting overrun. You kind of see this everywhere. But for the Hollywood sign in particular, what's challenging about it is there isn't really that sort of like easy touristy visitor center access to it. If you really want to see the sign, or you want to get up close to the sign, you've got to put in some effort to do it. Former Councilman Tom LaBonge lobbied Garmin and Google and maybe another GPS company to basically change the location so that when you search for the Hollywood sign in a mapping software, it would take you to the Griffith Observatory, which was, I think the LA Times described it as not the closest or the best viewpoint or the easiest to access. It was just the most politically expedient because it's not near a neighborhood, it's on city property. And I have a lot of sympathy for the people who live near the Hollywood sign because those roads were built in the 20s and 30s. they can barely fit one modern car on them, let alone like a throng of crowds trying to get up there. They're really not designed for that automobile traffic. But when you're talking about this landmark that's inside a city park, and one of the foundational elements of this particular park is that it always has to be free and always has to be open to the public, that's where you sort of run into this conflict. And Griffith Park throughout its history has always been this conflicting nature of, you've got these developed areas like zoos and golf courses and museums, and you've got these rugged, untouched backcountry chaparral areas where places like where P22 lives. And Griffith Park is designed to be both of those things. But it always requires this conversation and this sort of like mashing out of differences to figure out how to best manage this park. One of the things that the Dixon report was issued to sort of try to deal with this issue and get ahead of it in certain neighborhoods, like the Lake Hollywood area is experiencing an influx, but it hasn't really been swarmed yet, but it's definitely the next place to get swarmed now that Beechwood Canyon is especially kind of essentially closed. So we're trying to figure out kind of how we can solve this problem using some solutions, like you were saying, building a second sign and have it face the north side of the park, which seems very silly, to building a gondola, to building a visitor center somewhere else, to more simple and easy solutions such as like extending a network of shuttles throughout the park and through the nearby area so that you can restrict parking, restrict private car access, but still allow people on foot to get up there and have a little bit of control over that.
Yeah, I think that's, you really hit the nail on the head though. It's really hard to reconcile the idea that it's going to be free all the time to everybody. So there's no way, there's no price point that you can put on it to kind of siphon off the level of traffic because it's a public space,
right?
But then still provide pathways to it,
right,
that are readily accessible.
Right, and there's also been talk of there's some land above the Ford Amphitheater that is, I don't know if it's actually a public land yet or if it's in the process of trying to figure out if they can acquire it, but there is talk to build kind of an extra, a brand new trail that kind of loops around above the Ford Amphitheater, which would provide a really beautiful view of the Hollywood sign and also easy access to the, like they're hoping to do like a Hollywood dash shuttle from the Hollywood and Highland area, which would basically, that would allow like for the tourist crowd, that's a simple, easy way to get up there. You still have to do a little bit of a hike, so it's not like, you know, step out, take your selfie and go situation. But I don't know if there's a place that you can have that without really compromising the integrity of the park itself.
Yeah, I think the I know you spend some time and just the fact that you have many different viewpoints for people to access within the book, like that's something you focus on.
Yes.
There's so many people who just want to get up there behind the sign at Mount Lee though, and it's such a small space up there.
Yeah.
Like, how do you, like, how is that ever going to get regulated properly? Because at some point, like on a, you know, a Sunday afternoon or whatever, it's just going to be 50, 60 people up there, all body to body, trying to get their shot of overlooking LA with the sign in the foreground. And
right.
How do you, I don't know if there is a realistic way to regulate that without actually having like physical ticket holders or something up there, like counting the people as they go up, making sure that not more than so-and-so are up there at any given time. That's a really interesting challenge.
Yeah, I mean, those popular spots are, I mean, they're popular for a reason, and they're always going to be popular. So the way you dodge them is you either get up super early to do them, like I have done, or you try to spread the love around. So one of the things I did in the book was a friend of mine named Cameron Abdo. I sort of convinced him, I emailed him and I was like, hey, I've got this weird idea to try to hike to 16 different viewpoints of the Hollywood sign in a single day. I'm like, I don't know how long it's going to take or how difficult it's going to be, but he was on board for it. So we actually did the entire route without using a private car. We took the metro to Hollywood and Highland. There's a viewpoint in Hollywood and Highland, the shopping mall right there. It's not great, but it's there. You can do it. Then we took a lift up into that Lake Hollywood reservoir area, hiked around there. There's like 2 or 3 really good spots from there. There's some spots in the trail network that's kind of near Lake Hollywood, near that Hollywood reservoir rather. There's also tons of spots in the rest of the park. Near Bronson Cave is a really, really great place to see the Hollywood sign. And you can still get to that Hollywood sign overlook that was closed from Beechwood Canyon. You just have to hike now to get to it. But you can still get to that spot. It's still a great spot. There's even great spots near the observatory on the West Observatory Trail on your way up to the Griffith Observatory from Trails Cafe. That's actually probably my favorite spot. There's almost never anyone there because it's on the way from Trails up to the observatory, so there's always people going. It's not like a congregational area. There's a viewpoint that's just west of the Berlin Forest. Like there are so many different places to see the Hollywood sign. Like you do not have to have a fight with a crowd to get your selfie with the Hollywood sign. You can very easily go to a different spot and get that sign.
Yeah, I think even more it's going to be the challenge with people coming in from out of town who don't know that, you know.
Yeah.
Locals, I think over time have learned that they need to go earlier if they want to see something without a crowd in Griffith Park. But like I remember the last time I was walking back from doing the it's like the brush fire trail, the one that's 3 miles up, 3 miles down, to get there, and like, you know, where like the caves are, it's the Bronson Caves are close by there. And on my way back, it was like 10:30. We'd gone up there like 7 or something, and it's like 10:30. There's just a caravan of people going up there, and it's like it's not even people in hiking gear at that point. It's families, you know, grandmas wearing dresses and sandals, and like, you know,
oh my god,
the fathers wearing dress shirts and like dress shoes and stuff. And it's like, it's clear most likely they're from out of town. This is probably going to be their only chance to see the sign. They Googled it, or they found something. Okay, this is the closest route to us, so let's just go up there and we'll get our photo or do what we want to do, and then we'll come back and just brave it's like an unshaded trail in the middle of the afternoon, and they're wearing office gear.
People really underestimate the park and the trails in particular, because you assume like, oh, it's where the Hollywood sign is. It's a tourist thing. I could just go and take a walk there. I have 2 great stories for you that are very similar to that. One was I was mapping and hiking in like the interior of the park. So like near Mount Chapel, near Mount Bell. This is a super rugged area. There's no trail signs. The trails are really confusing. And I found this family of tourists from out of the country who were in like dress slacks, like holding a purse, like no water, no shade, no anything. And they were asking me how to get to the Hollywood sign. And I told them, you know, you really need to just go back to where you came from. And here's a viewpoint that's near there. This is the easiest way. You are not going to get to the sign from where you are right now, especially not in like dress shoes. And, you know, I did my hike. I found them on the way back down. They were like scrambling up this like fire break that wasn't even a trail. And it's like, well, that's when I hear a helicopter later today, that's going to be these people. And also I live in Thai Town. So my sort of entry to the park is always the Ferndale entrance. And I do a really nice loop up to Mount Hollywood and through the observatory and back. And every single time, without fail, I see people from out of town or who are just coming in to sort of get that Hollywood sign picture. They're at the Charlie Turner Trailhead, which is the north side of the former parking lot of the observatory, and I can just read on their faces that they're realizing, oh, the Hollywood sign is not on Mount Hollywood. It's much further than we thought. Like there's just every single day that
there's so many people in LA who think that. They assume that Mount Hollywood is where the Hollywood sign is. Well, I guess we're spending a lot of time on the sign, but there's so many other places within the park that you can go check out. So many little hidden like gardens and just interesting little places that you can visit. Thinking of like Amir's Garden or like Captain's Roost or things like that, where they're beautiful. And if your whole goal is just to take photos, which I don't know, that probably shouldn't be your only goal if you're in Griffith Park, but like those places are stunning for that kind of stuff too. You know, you don't need to go to the same place that everybody else is going to.
Absolutely. And there are around 70 miles of trails, including paved paths and including equestrian trails in the park. If you think that Griffith Park is really, really crowded, you just need to go somewhere else inside the park. I have had extremely solitary experiences inside the park, and not that far from basically civilization. If you're around the observatory, or you're near the Hollywood sign, those are really the hot spots for crowds on the trails. If you're not near those places, you can really have a feeling of having the whole place to yourself.
Yeah, it's very cool. I think the last thing I wanted to touch on with you, and it's something you actually opened the book with, I think it's right after the table of contents, you do a land acknowledgement.
Yes. Yeah.
And just catching back to the Tongva tribe and like why it's important. I think that the spirit of that is why it's important to be taking care of the land and realizing that there were people here for many, many generations before Los Angeles was even in the glint of an eye of anybody, who were taking care of this place, who were a part of the land. And it got me thinking, like, well, what can we do as Angelenos, as people who live and utilize these spaces to make sure that they're around for the generations to come? So maybe you just want to touch on that acknowledgement and maybe give some ideas about what we should be thinking about as a community, to make sure that these spaces are there for generations that follow us.
Yeah, of course. First of all, it was really, really important for me to have that land acknowledgement in the front of the book, and to have an actual Tongva tribe member write it. That's sort of the spirit of land acknowledgement. If you're not familiar with these things, it's a relatively new thing that's happening in sort of the outdoors in the parks, where whoever is speaking sort of acknowledges the indigenous caretakers of the land who were there before Western European or American people has sort of taken over the land from them. So in a place like Griffith Park, it's less complicated because there's only really one tribe that was there. It was the Tongva tribe, or the Tongva Gabrielino tribe. And I reached out through the Autry Museum to Julia Bogney, who is the cultural officer for the Tongva tribe, and I let her write this land acknowledgement. And it was really important for me to have that in the book, and for me to have that placed at the front of the book, just to acknowledge that the Tongva were the original caretakers, and they're still here in LA, and they're still active inside the park. And hopefully that can sort of inspire future stewards for the park. If you read the book and if you learn the history of Griffith Park, you really realize that this park is not a given for Los Angeles. And us having it in the future is also not a given. One of the reasons that Griffith Park is around is because the deed that Griffith granted to the city for its use as a park is pretty strict, and has a lot of provisions in it about what the park can and cannot be used for. But still, LA found a way to sort of make some mistakes in the park. If you look at some of the other big parks around the time that Griffith Park was around, you look at like Elysian Park, you look at MacArthur Park, or what used to be Westlake Park, and what did we do? We basically put freeways through those parks. We bulldozed a huge section of Elysian and put Dodger Stadium up there. Now it's the world's most enormous parking lot that's in the middle of this park. So LA does not have a good track record of taking care of parks. And places like Griffith Park, and any city park, any natural space that you like, what it needs is it needs you to actually step up and act as a park constituent. You may not live in the district that, I think it's City District, Council District 4 is basically the entirety of Griffith Park. You may not live in that district, but if you use that park, you're a constituent of that park, and you're a constituent of that district. So you can bother that district, let them know how you feel about stuff. You can let your city officials know. We're also governed by the LA County Board of Supervisors. They have some say over this stuff. You can bug county supervisors. You can vote for people who care about parks, and you can vote for bond issues and voter issues that fund these parks. One of the big issues facing public parks everywhere of all different types is a really tremendous lack of funding. You see it in headlines mostly about the National Park Service, because it has this enormous backlog of deferred maintenance requests. City parks are the same thing. There's a lot of stuff that could be a lot nicer and a lot more pleasant and equitable for people in Griffith Park if it just had the funds to do it. One of the things that we've seen this year, which I think is actually, it was recommended in the Dixon report, and I think it's a great improvement to the park, is the Parkline Shuttle, which is a free weekend-only shuttle that basically runs throughout the entire park or almost the entire park, from Traveltown up to the observatory and back. And it allows you to get around the park without a car, which you really were not able to do before that shuttle existed. So there are plans to extend that shuttle into places like Beechwood. Hopefully we can extend the shuttle to the North Hollywood Red Line Metro Station, or maybe even to the west of the park near Lake Hollywood, near the Cahuenga Peak Trailhead. That would really, really, I think, cut down on a lot of the issues facing the park in terms of overcrowding and traffic, and car pressure on those nearby neighborhoods. But that only happens if we make some noise about it. If the city officials don't hear from us, and they're only hearing from those homeowners that are nearby, well, the things that the homeowners want, that's what's going to happen. And that might not always be what's best for the park or what's best for hikers in general.
Yeah, it's a lot of good food for thought on that, and something I think we should all be considering as we move forward, and hopefully get back to utilizing our public spaces here in the next month or two.
I cannot wait to get on the trails. I'm really going crazy.
Yeah, now we've been teasing the park for like the last 20 minutes here, so I think people are going to be primed to want to go out and explore some of these places that you've covered in the book. Why don't you hold it up again? Mention again where people can get it, when it's going to be out.
Sure. So it's called Discovering Griffith Park. It's on Mountaineers Books, and it's available right now for pre-order. It's out on May 15th. Right now you can pre-order it on Amazon or the website Bookstore, which allows you to order it from a local bookseller near you. There's a handful of shops in LA and in the neighboring communities around that carry the book and will carry the book in the future. So if you want to support a local business, great. If you don't have one of those near you, or you don't want to, if you just want to use some Amazon bucks, Amazon's got it as well.
Great. Well, Casey, thanks so much for your time today. It was a pleasure speaking with you. I think we were able to cover a lot of great stuff today, and hopefully folks will be coming out to pick up your book soon, because I'm looking forward to reading it myself and getting a physical copy. So
perfect.
Thanks for writing it.
Thank you so much. It is a passion project, and it really is my love letter to the city of LA. So I hope people can get this book, they learn something about it, and I hope that they can learn to appreciate Griffith Park more for what it is. And if not that, maybe at least you hear a really crazy story that you want to share with your friends.
Yeah. Well, great to have you. And for everybody out there, we will see you on the next edition of We Talk LA. Take care, guys.
Thanks so much, Brian.